There's been plenty happening, though, in the world of national security and foreign relations, and who better to speak to about such issues than my colleague at The Australian, the foreign editor of that great newspaper, Greg Sheridan. Good to talk to you, Greg.
Great to be with you, Chris.
Look, there's a bit to talk about today, but I want to start with Spies. As you know, I used to be Chief of Staff to a foreign minister. I used to love dealing with our spy agencies. It's a fascinating business. And as you would know, this spying is going on all the time by virtually every country that has any capability to do so. But to find out that our own spy agency, ASIO, has dealt with a spy ring in this country and expelled certain so-called diplomats is always a big story and always very enlightening. Can you tell us who was the country involved?
Well, Chris, the rumour is that it was Russia. So I don't have independent confirmation of that, but that's the very strong rumour. I thought when you were remembering your old days in government, you were going to tell us you used to be a spy. But
I used to have fun working out who was and who wasn't.
Absolutely. Chris, I'd also draw your attention to one other element of Mike Burgess's speech. I greatly admire Mike Burgess, and I think ASIO is a fantastic agency. But he's gone back into this ridiculous decision not to use any word relating to Islam again.
I want to come back to that. Sorry to interrupt you, Greg. I wanted to come back to that. But just before we do, I thought we'd hear from Mike Burgess about this spy ring and what he revealed.
These spies developed targeted relationships with current and former politicians, a foreign embassy and a state police service. They monitored their country's diaspora community. They tried to obtain classified information about Australia's trade secrets. They asked a public servant about information on security protocols at a major Australian airport. They successfully cultivated and recruited a relationship with an Australian government security clearance holder who had access to sensitive details of defence technology.
ASIO boss Mike Burgess there revealing those details. Now, we know the government has said it's not China. Greg Sheridan has just suggested that there is speculation it was indeed Russia, but that gives us some detail of the sorts of activity that go on in this country and elsewhere. Now, to come back to this other issue that I think you quite rightly wanted to focus on, Greg, and that is Mike Burgess saying that the official agencies want to avoid the term Islamist extremism.
Yeah, so, you know, I'm a big admirer of Mike Burgess. I'm a big admirer of Scott Morrison. But in one respect, Scott Morrison has been less disciplined and less accurate than Malcolm Turnbull. Morrison has tended to use the term Islamic terrorism. I think that's a bit too broad. Turnbull tended to use the very precise and accurate term Islamist terrorism. Islamism is a political philosophy emerging out of Islam and a particular interpretation of it. And if you add to it violence to achieve an Islamist outcome, that is Islamist terrorism. Mike Burgess has now taken up the ridiculous position that Duncan Lewis took up a few years ago, in which I, for my sins, Chris, must confess to you, I wrote a lot of columns criticising Duncan Lewis about this, so I'm honour bound to do the same service for Mike Burgess. This is just ridiculous. What are we dealing with if we're talking about religious extremism? What are we dealing with? Quaker militancy or Buddhist jihadism? I mean, this is just stupid. It doesn't help Islam, and it undervalues the Australian people as though you can't talk openly and directly to them. And similarly, the decision not to use the word right-wing extremism. I spent the whole of the Cold War telling the moderate left it had to oppose and call out the extreme left. And now he's going to use the term ideologically motivated extremism instead of right-wing extremism. So I think this kind of mealy-mouthed, politically correct nonsense is really a giant step backwards. I'm very surprised to see it happen under the Morrison government, frankly.
I think you're very right. I mean, these are serious issues. We are on guard against these forms of extremism in the here and now. We have to guard against their philosophies or ideologies at least being promulgated. We know what Islamist extremism is. We know it's a major factor to be encountered. And you only got to read a lot of, George Orwell to talk about if you get soft and woolly in your language, you get soft and woolly in your thinking. And to me, it's very condescending to our great Muslim populations in this country and the rest of the population that we can't actually deal with this specific issue, the extremism. And as you say, it equally applies to right-wing extremism. That doesn't slur everyone on the right of centre. It targets right-wing extremism.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Chris. And the Islamist interpretation of Islam is a minority interpretation within Islam, but it has very wide support in a lot of Islamic communities around the world. I mean, Saudi Arabia is a form of Islamism. So is Iran. So, in a sense, is Pakistan. So there is very wide support among Islamic communities for Islamism. Now, the way you have to deal with it is to call it out, confront the ideas, and, you know, intelligent, sensible Muslims have to deal with the ideas and reject them, and so do the rest of us who are common citizens in this society. Now, you can't do that if you're scared even to say what the problem is. And I just think, I thought we'd gone past all this, and, you know, it just shows there's a regression to the mean about all bureaucracies. You just go back to the same dopiness. After a little spasm of common sense, you just retreat to the same sort of yes, minister silliness in time.
Yeah, you're spot on, and it's a worry. And speaking of silliness, a certain former president of the United States has stepped back into the fray now. There's really bizarre speculation that Meghan Markle is looking at some sort of political career, and Donald Trump says he'd like to run against her at the next US election. Have a look.
Well, I hope that happens, because if that happened, then I think I'd have an even stronger feeling toward running. I'm not a fan of hers. I think that what she talks about, the royal family and the Queen, I happen to think I know the Queen, as you know. I've met with the Queen, and I think the Queen is a tremendous person, and I'm not a fan of Meghan.
Yes, as you know, Greg, he's met with the Queen. He knows the Queen. Now, Meghan Markle's not going to run, of course, but the key question, just briefly, is do you believe that Donald Trump could be a contender at the next election?
I do, Chris, and I think Trump is revealing himself as a completely contemptible person. Donald Trump and Meghan Markle kind of deserve each other, really.
Yes.
And it shows that Trump traffics entirely in the business of celebrity. Now, I upset a lot of people by saying there was really a great continuity between Barack Obama and Donald Trump, because they were both celebrity candidates. Obama was the celebrity candidate of the woke left. Trump was a celebrity candidate of the World Championship Wrestling, Apprentice, You're Fired, Miss Universe contest kind of people. But this is, in my opinion, Chris, mainstream politics has a lot to answer for, but going down the Trump road is a degradation of mainstream politics. He did a lot of good things as president and a lot of bad things. But after November 3, his behaviour has been contemptible. The attack on the Congress on January 6 was contemptible. The way he addresses his fellow countrymen is contemptible, and the Republicans have to defeat him. You can't ban him forever from Twitter or anything like that, but it's always the battle in democracy for the moderates to defeat the extremists. And moderate Republicans have to stand up to this nonsense. And the fact that he thinks the biggest thing he should be talking about is Meghan Markle just tells you what political culture is like if it's dominated by Donald Trump.
Cutting to the quick as ever. Greg, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks very much, Chris.
Greg Sheridan there, the foreign editor at The Australian. You can read him, of course, in that paper, definitely on Saturdays and throughout the week.